Welcome, this is Dr. Plague, and today I just want to make a short video of a suggestion. I've noticed something in my employer's electronics lab that I've never thought about doing in the past, but now that I think about it, I kind of like the idea. Therefore, I decided to do this in my own lab. Now, this is not a new idea, and I'm sure some of you are already doing this, but if not, you may want to consider it. So, what is my employer doing? Well, before I get to that, have you ever had the need to sit down and do a bunch of soldering, such as soldering components to a bunch of PCBs or prototyping boards or whatever? So you sit down, turn on your soldering iron, and wait for it to heat up. And then you go to work and do all of your soldering. And once you're finished, you tin up the tip of your iron and place it back into its holder and inspect your fantastic work. After you're done inspecting your work and you're confident that everything looks great, you pat yourself on the back for a job well done. You may not have looked forward to all of that soldering, but you've managed to remove that thorn from your side. So excitedly, you get up, turn off the lights, and leave your lab. Now, an hour or so later, after you're far away from your lab, you start to wonder, did I remember to turn off my soldering iron? I cannot tell you how many times that has happened to me. In fact, with my previous employer, I once mistakenly left a soldering iron on overnight. After I got home from work one day, I was questioning whether I left it on, but since I live over 30 miles or about 48 kilometers away from my office, I decided not to turn around and waited until morning. When I returned the next morning, my suspicion was correct. I did in fact leave the iron on. But luckily, it was one of those that turned itself off after a period of time, so no harm was done. I believe my Hakko irons here, the FX888D models, do not self-power off. If I'm incorrect, then please leave a comment. Now, I'm not really concerned about them starting a fire per se. That's probably unlikely, but I suppose that could happen. What I'm most concerned about is damaging the soldering tip if it's left on for too long of a period. So, what did my employer do to help remedy this situation? On every soldering station, they have one of these timers attached to the workbench. All of their soldering irons at each workstation are plugged into these timers. Before you can turn on a soldering iron, you need to select the maximum amount of time that you want them to be on. This particular timer, which is a Leviton timer, can select between 10, 20, 30, or 60 minutes. And the bottom button turns it off. That's quite handy, because if you forget to turn off your soldering iron, this timer switch will turn it off for you after the timer expires. Now, don't get me wrong, this is still no substitute for one of these, a fire extinguisher, which every electronics lab should have. With that said, this video is not meant to be a tutorial on how to make one of these timers. It is just a suggestion for something you might want to consider looking into. Since making one of these requires mains wiring, I'm not going to show you how to make one, since electric code can vary from one municipality to the next. Also, we have 120 volts here in the US as compared to 220 to 240 volts in many other countries. These timer switches do come with wiring instructions and are not that difficult to wire up. But do not attempt to make one of these if you're not sure about what you're doing, or if you don't know how to work with mains wiring. Consult with a qualified electrician if you're not confident in your abilities. You can also look into pre-built timers if you don't want to make one. I did consider some outlet strips that had built-in timers, but I didn't quite like any of the ones that I found. The biggest problem I found with pre-built units is that all of the ones I saw had an option to turn the outlets on indefinitely and bypass the timer. I want to make sure that the outlets are always timed and that I can't accidentally disable the timer and leave my solder irons on indefinitely. So I chose to make my own timer setup. One thing I found out about this timer that I wasn't aware of when I bought it is that if you press the 60-minute button for a few seconds, then the timer will go into a 24-hour mode, which is indicated by this LED turning an amber color. I wasn't too pleased to find this out, but it is fairly easy to see that it is in this mode if you pay attention to the LEDs, and at least I can be assured it won't stay on for longer than 24 hours. So, what I did to make this was to install an electrical box on my bench. Then I simply took an extension cord and cut it in half and wired it up to the timer inside the electrical box. And like I said, I'm not going to show you how I wired this up. You can do your own research if you're not certain. After installing this timer, I plugged an outlet strip into it which has all my soldering irons plugged in. I wouldn't use this for anything that draws heavy current, such as a space heater, but soldering irons should be fine. Just make sure all the wiring and connectors are properly rated for the job. I did test the current draw from the outlet for these soldering irons, and they each drew well under an amp. And in fact, when they weren't actively heating, they drew close to nothing. And here is the rating of the switch. They claim it to be up to 20 amps, but I wouldn't get anywhere near that. My employer made these in a similar fashion, except they cut the cord on an outlet strip and wired that directly to the timer switch. I used an extension cord to get a little extra length, and that should be fine since the current draw is fairly minimal. Also, I am not sending my hot air rework station through this switch, since the cool air would automatically turn on whenever power is applied. I'll connect it to the switch to show you what would happen. As you can see, this would be quite annoying and rather unnecessary since the sound of the machine in and of itself would be a reminder to turn it off. Therefore, I'll just use this timer switch to control my soldering irons. And by the way, I tested this hot air rework station, and when it is actively applying heat, it drew around 2.5 amps. So I do want to keep that off of the timer switch. Well, that's all I have for today. Hopefully, I'll get to making some more videos soon. I hope this has been helpful, and maybe it will give you some ideas to improve your lab. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, right here on Dr. Plague.